Hey everyone, welcome back to the Stelios podcast. In today's episode, I'm joined by Michael Kill, CEO of the Time Industries Association. Michael is the driving force behind the UK's nighttime economy and has been a key advocate for the industry, especially during challenging times like the pandemic. Although it's not been that great after it, but you know what? These guys are lucky to have Michael and his team on their side. Michael has decades of experience across independent business, corporate roles, public sector. His expertise spans marketing, operations, licensing, logistics. Over the years, he's held leadership positions, including Group Operations Director at the Drinks Group and Commercial Director at Norwich University. He's worked closely with government, local authorities, and communities, helping venues and festivals and live events improve operations and develop the best practices. Michael has also played a major role in shaping national strategies for events and entertainment, working with artists, brands, and operators to create an unforgettable experience. As CEO of the NTIA, Michael has become a national spokesperson for the UK's nighttime industries. He's been a relentless advocate for business in the sector, fighting for recognition, pushing for reform, and ensuring the voices of operators and creatives are heard. The Time Industries Association represents one of the most vibrant and exciting sectors of the UK economy. Their mission is to highlight the cultural and economic value of the nighttime economy, to support businesses and to champion the incredible entrepreneurs behind it. The Ceres podcast is brought to you by, us at Ceres. And for those of you that don't know, we are proud to supply fish and chip shops, restaurants, street food businesses, pubs, bars, cruise ships, and venues with a wide range of food and cleaning solutions. Whether they need a crispy batter mix, a tasty kota for chicken, squid or pork, especially Japanese pork, or even a rich, flavourful gravy for a pie, or Louisiana seasoning for ribs and fries. Don't worry, we've got you covered. But it doesn't stop there. Our deep fryer cleaner keeps fryers spotless across the UK, Europe and even America. While our heavy-duty degreaser is made for tackling the toughest jobs, we are always working on new solutions for the toughest tasks. Whatever your business needs, you can rely on us to deliver high-quality solutions. Visit www.ceres.shop to place your order today. Don't forget, we offer free mainland shipping across the UK and normal shipping to British Isles, Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland and many parts of Europe. And if you're listening to this from a country where our website doesn't cover, get in touch for a personal international quote, like a recent customer did in Iceland who needed 40 buckets of deep fry cleaner. Before we dive into the conversation, we have launched a Ceres WhatsApp announcement group. It's a simple way to get podcast updates, exclusive offers, news updates, offers updates. No endless chats because it's one way pretty much. It's just the essentials, and you'll find the link in the episode show notes, so be sure to join us. There you will also find links to our discussion group for the Ceres podcast on Facebook and a link to our mailing list. You'd genuinely be crazy to not join any of those things. You only have to join one though. At Ceres, we're here to help your business thrive with innovative products and valuable insights. Drop us a message anytime because we would absolutely love to hear what you are working on. Now, on to today's conversation with Michael Kill. Michael, how's your week been, mate?
Busy, very busy. I have stopped my travels for the minute, and we're focused on our conference, which is coming up on the 5th and 6th of February in Birmingham. 260 speakers, 6 stages, and about 1,800 delegates so far.
Wow.
I think we're about 50 tickets away from selling out. So
that's a big event.
It is a big event. I've lost hair. I have lost time, sleep, and everything that goes with those events. But from battling weather to working out whether the marquee is going to be big enough to
Whereabouts in Birmingham are you doing it?
Hockley Social Club.
Okay.
So we always stick to independent venues because it would be remiss of me to sit there and say, "Oh yeah, no, we're behind independent venues," and then go off and do it in the NEC or something. It doesn't really make sense, does it? So we try and make independent venues work, and we find them in these cities, and we're a satellite conference. So we started in Bristol, we then moved to London, then to Manchester. Now we're doing Birmingham and potentially Nottingham or Leeds or Liverpool. The next one.
Yeah.
So we'll.
What's the objective of the event? Like, what is it that you hope to gain over those few days?
Well, I've got a very, very focused objective here, and there was several reasons for setting it up. As you can appreciate, all these conferences, people are charging £400-500 to get in, and we don't. What we do is we charge £25 a day to get in, and the reason for that is because I want the owners of businesses and the staff within businesses to access the knowledge and information that, inclusively. So we set it up in a way that we bring as many of our partners and people we know together, from internationals from across the world to, artists that people would love to see. This one, we've got UB40, we've got Eats Everything, we've got Fish 56, Octagon, the influencer, Turno, DJ Rap, lots of different people, as well as the Minister for Nighttime Economy from New South Wales, Australia, representatives from Mexico, Canada, US, Colombia. So it's a real opportunity to sort of broaden your knowledge and understanding. And there's a huge array of subjects. But the key thing that we do with this is, one, it's accessible. We ask people to walk away with two things: a broader network of people that they know and a broader knowledge. And the other thing that we ban, and I think this is important, is no suits and no uniforms, because we see them as barriers to engagement. So for us, it's a really, really important opportunity. It's grown exponentially to the 400 people in Bristol to 1,800 plus people 4 years later. And I think that's testament to how that community's grown and how important people feel that the event is.
So I guess if you're saying no suits and no uniform, I guess the reason is you could probably have like a bar staff member standing next to a CEO, and there won't be no sort of like, oh, I don't want to talk to that person because I feel like I'm beneath them. Whereas this sort of, it's a bit more egalitarian, I guess, to some degree, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it's like police officers, isn't it? I mean, we want people to be able to approach the police. We're all humans in the end. So, the same way that Eats Everything will talk about electronic music, a police officer should be able to come and engage with all different types of people. And we feel that the suit and the uniform is just something that just disengages people, makes it very, very difficult for people to, particularly the youngsters that we want to, to really sort of impress upon. And I think it's an important thing. I mean, we've worked very hard to retain that. And a lot of people talk about it. A lot of people go, oh, well, you sure that's the way you want to do it? You're a bit too cheap. And I'm like, listen, you can criticize us all day long, but the reality is it's working. People like it. More people are coming each year. People vote with their feet. We know that from an industry that we work within. And as long as they vote with their feet and we're doing it the right way, then long may it continue.
I guess if it's that sort of ticket price and you don't fill up, you've got a problem.
Well, exactly.
And whereas if you're expensive and you don't fill up, that's probably because you're expensive. Like, so.
Well, it is. I mean, with the ethos around it is, let's get as many people. People see it as an annual gathering now. They see it as their opportunity to come and engage and mix with different peoples from different places all around the country, across the UK, Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, mix with people that they don't traditionally always see. And there's a meeting place where they can come and stay overnight. They can enjoy the information. They can network. They can meet. They can do business. So, for us, it's a really important event for us, and it's really sort of done a lot to help us maintain that community, particularly as we built such a strong community during the pandemic. It's now become the event that is bringing those people back together on an annual basis.
But if you guys can't run a good event, something's wrong.
Oh, that's the thing. That's the one thing that if we can't motivate and drive people to come somewhere and talk about the industry, then and we work very hard at it. I mean, we plan this 8-9 months out, so it's no small feat.
Yeah.
I mean, getting politicians to change diary and internationals to fly in is considered. I mean, we've got a delegation from New South Wales, Australia. Tokyo, Takumazawa from Tokyo runs JPNA, which is the equivalent to us in Japan. So we get a huge array of interesting subjects as well.
When I spoke to you last time, it really impressed me how you're talking to your counterparts abroad, and we're all learning from each other. I think that, for me, opened my eyes a little bit, because I've spoken to Kate from UK Hospitality, I've spoken to Alan, but they've never really mentioned, and it's not a knock on them, they've never really mentioned anyone abroad, because maybe they don't really have to. They're just looking at what's going on in the UK. But you seem to be tapped into that. Why is that good for you, do you think?
Well, I think nighttime economy is a global sort of language base anyway. I mean, I also am the vice president for the International Nightlife Association,
Okay.
so it's part of my job as well. So I think it's important that we learn. I mean, I travel around. I went to Colombia 2 years ago now, and went to Bogota and learned a lot from speaking to the Congress over there. I was teaching them about our licensing laws, and they called it the law of the night, as it were. We've influenced things like Australia through different ways, talking about monetization, but they've influenced us by looking at things like the Vibrancy Act. The Vibrancy Act, where there is a really important relationship and trust mechanism between national government, local government, and the industry. So there's a lot to take from it. When you talk about Simone D'Antonio and URBACT and that city after dark sort of motivation, safety mechanisms, different initiatives like Night School that start to teach people about nightlife and what it is to be part of a career. So there is a huge amount to learn. I mean, the other thing is I mean, I sit as part of the International Nightlife Association representative for the United Nations as well. So I go as an NGO and am a consultative body for the United Nations on nightlife and nighttime economy globally. So I think it's a really important thing that we do. And I think hospitality don't do it as well as nightlife, if that makes sense. But I think it's slightly different and nuanced. There is crossover, but you're talking about, you hear of a lot of hospitality groups, but they are very locally honed. But when you talk about nighttime economy, there is this immense network globally that want to talk to each other, want to develop nighttime economy to the best of their ability. And we're always sharing ideas. We've got a group with nearly 200 nighttime economy representatives and advocates on it, which we share ideas, show what we're doing, share events that we're putting on. So it's a real community base. And I don't see that as much with hospitality, if I'm going to be honest. I don't know why.
No.
But it
must be something different in their setup, don't know. Or the way that industry works, that sector.
Well, I think there is engagement internationally. But I think it's quite, if you think about hospitality, it's quite consistent. Whereas nighttime economy is, I always look at nighttime economy as you've got three key areas that make it a very fickle environment to manage, which is people, fashion, and music. Some of the things are very difficult. Hospitality is very different. It's very business and economics. So there aren't as many sort of strong variables in terms of societal influence. So yes, there are economics. Yes, we're talking about people, but ultimately it's about service. It's about standards. It's about quality. It's about, it's that sort of thing where I'm dealing with, okay, live music, different environments, setting up something in, I went to the Sydney Opera House when I was in New South Wales, and we then go and have a look at the varying types of businesses and clubs over there and some of the limitations, and then talk about how we have overcome those limitations, and things like, having a scheme of compliance, which then brings down your insurance premiums. And we're always sharing bits and pieces like that and work that we can adapt and take and play within different territories, which I think is, the way it should happen, and should happen with hospitality as well. But I'm not sure why it doesn't. But if I'm going to be honest, I mean, this is where nighttime economy converges on hospitality, because I think we do influence through the nighttime economy sphere.
Yeah.
But without a doubt, I mean, I speak to my international counterparts throughout the week, every week. And I'm always saying, what do you think about this? How about this? Have you got an idea? How have you dealt with it? And that kind of makes it, interesting, as well as speak to the people in the UK,
Yeah.
But, sometimes you just want someone to go, why have you done it like that? We've done it like this. And then we'll understand the background, and that might take me back into a government meeting or something else that gives a different perspective.
Absolutely. As you say that, I was thinking to myself, the UK has probably the most overregulated nighttime sector. Well, aside from probably America, maybe. I guess they're probably quite. No, okay, no. Drop my mic. And I think sorry, okay, not America then. And what is it like when you see your counterparts abroad and they hear about this overregulation? Like, because I don't think, and we're going to get into it, but I don't think the UK has a very conducive sort of policy for nightlife businesses. It feels like there seems to be a roadblock at every step of the way.
It's massively overregulated, and I think the challenge, and I'll tell you where the wake-up call came. I went to Bogota, Colombia, and I spoke at the Congress, and then I spoke at Hazabaras, which is the bar event that they put over there in November, which is great. A friend of mine, Camilo Ospina Guzman, very good friend of mine who runs Hazabaras, and I said to him, how, when we were talking about this, how do you set up a club or a bar? You've just got to go to the police and satisfy 5 things, and they'll let you do what you want.
That's it.
That's it.
And 5 specific things, or just 5 things that local area pick on? Or
yeah, okay. Well, they have to. I think it's a confidence thing with and then open a bar. But the reality is when I spoke to them about all the tranches and mechanisms that we have in place, it was almost frightening for them. That comparative position was surreal. The US have got some, they are very well regulated, don't get me wrong, but I think they're a couple of steps away from where we are.
Okay. It strikes me as, the way that the UK is, they've almost over-regulated so much that I almost feel like nobody really wants to go. No, it's not the only reason, but it's an added complication to the sort of problems that the nighttime industry has. So, you guys have to have how many bouncers per club, per person. This is just one aspect, by the way, of what you do. But you think to yourself, I remember chatting to someone who had a security firm. He's retired now, and he said, he started 20 years ago, and he said, when you think how it's all gone over 20 years, he goes, it's amazing there are still clubs alone, aside from all the other headwinds, but the fact that this is why they have to charge at the door, this is why they have to charge so much for drinks, because all the costs have just gone up so high that to actually, before you open the door, so I do wonder, has any government over here ever said to you, actually, we can see this is a problem? Or is it one of those things that once the regulation's there, there's no winding back?
Well, I think the thing about it is the local government authorities and policing like to have the control. The government are always asking us, what do you want us to do in terms of deregulation and licensing and planning easement? And there's been a lot of work, like, for instance, we have to advertise in a newspaper when you apply for a license.
That's right, yeah.
Who reads a newspaper?
Nobody. Maybe the local councillor. That's about it, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing about it is it costs between £500 and £1,200 to put that ad in specifically. So it is, we've got things like that are going on. There are some very onerous and bureaucratic systems around licensing that make it very difficult. We are, without a doubt, over-regulated. There is a constant conversation about over-regulation, streamline, reasons for people not investing. The fact that we have a governance system, particularly around councillors, that are very, without wanting to be rude, that we don't have a lot of representation in the core market that we represent so there's not a lot of 18 to 30-year-olds that are counsellors, I'm trying to say. And the reality is that then presents some other challenges, because trying to explain what a nightclub is, or what a hybrid environment is, or whatever it is, to counsellors that don't come from an era which understand that is very, very difficult. And I think that, we've got issues like that are a problem. We've also got policing, which is under-resourced at the moment, and the pressures from police are very onerous. So policing do everything that they can to control the environment. So, for instance, if a new application comes in, or someone goes for a license, the police object automatically.
Okay.
And then what they ask for is, you have your standard license, you have mandatory conditions or operating requirements, and then you have nuanced operating requirements, which are conditions that are added on for your locality, etc. So, and what tends to happen is the police really go for quite onerous conditions to see what they can get into your license, to make it quite hard, not hard to operate, but they try to substantiate under the four licensing objectives: public safety, safety of children, antisocial behaviour, and all the other bits and pieces that come along with it. So it then becomes quite onerous. But a lot of this is really about whether those environments can be policed. And the big question we always ask is, are we running society on whether we can police it or not? And that's a worry also, because we pay our rates like everyone else, but we have massive... without doubt. I mean, you think about it, we pay business rates, and we then have to pay to operate past midnight through things like late night levies, of which 70% goes to policing, 30% goes to maintenance of the area. But the reality is we don't see the benefit of that 70% increase, because they're so short resource-wise. Most of it gets drawn into city centre areas, and the cost of that disappears. So we see none of the benefit anyway.
What's the 30% for? For what? For the area?
So you've got something called a late night levy.
Okay.
The late night levy means that if you, in certain areas, dictated by the local authority, they have the ability to introduce a late night levy. That late night levy is an amount of money that businesses pay, to which can either be distributed by a committee, or it can be distributed in the proportion of 70% going to local policing post midnight, and 30% going to the maintenance of the area, clean up waste, all that side of things. And the ones that are in place, and I think there are about 11 or 12, might be a few more now, has been a cause of contention for such a long time, because we pay business rates.
Yeah.
And now what they're saying is, you're going to pay more because you operate past midnight. So what's happening is they're curtailing the post-midnight position. There is no transport. We can't get public transport in most of the towns and cities up and down the country. Safety is an issue. Transport could be the answer if you think about it, in terms of dispersal and social behaviour, safety of people getting home, safety of staff getting home. But we always seem to be laboured with this, right, we want you to pay this for policing. We never see the police. We don't really see the benefit of the late night levy. The business rates that we get, we don't see the benefit of the post-midnight transport infrastructure, which we should have, which is a big issue and hits businesses. As we know, London is one of those business areas which is a real issue, where we can't get home after midnight in many areas, particularly midweek. So, it's frustrating for the industry. So we're not only overtaxed, we're also overregulated, and duty for alcohol.
And underserved.
Oh, massively. Yeah. It's almost like we're a cash cow, or they see us as an opportunity to tax.
I don't understand why you need to pay 30% for essentially what they're describing as, what I understand, is cleaning, because most of the mess probably happens inside a nightclub or a bar or a pub. If we're talking about those settings.
When we say that, sorry, just to clarify.
Okay.
So we pay a certain amount of money, all right, and it varies up and down the country, but 30% of that money being paid is allocated to local authorities for cleaning the streets and maintenance, and 70% for policing. But you're quite right.
You're paying it already. But you're paying it in your rates already, aren't you? So, exactly. Yeah. So you're paying it twice and getting it half. So at best, we all get it at half. So you're getting it probably at a quarter, to be honest.
So it's a surreal environment that we sort of work within. And, with things like the autumn budget coming in April, we're I mean, the whole thing about the save 1p on a pint
Oh yeah, that was great.
net position, we actually lose 3.5% on our liquor margin when you look at the rest of the products that they've increased.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a smoke and mirrors thing. But listen, without getting into a moan fest.
No, but do you think people even look at that? You know, when they did that whole, I think it was the Sun that put penny pint, whatever you call it, and I just think, come on, people ain't thick. Like they know, they know they're being mugged off. Like I don't think that anybody that listens to this podcast know that I'm not exactly happy with the current government because of what they're doing. But like, I don't think they've actually pleased one sector of society yet. Maybe I'm being a bit hard on them, but I've not seen it. Like,
you're absolutely not. I mean, people are absolutely livid with what's been going on. The manifesto promises, the discussions that we had leading up to everything. It's funny. I mean, we had meetings with Rishi Sunak and people like that leading up to it. We had big meetings during that election campaign, and the biggest worry that he had was for them to have such a significant majority that they wouldn't be able to challenge. And he's right. He was right, without a doubt. I mean, where we are at the moment is we are at the behest of a majority that will pretty much get whatever they need through.
That's the problem.
And that is
but
a problem.
The downside is that they have the majority, but in my mind, they're choosing it on things that please them or suit them, which I guess most governments do to some degree. But I had John Webber on the podcast. John Webber's he's head of ratings at Colliers. Colliers, like, they do house sales, but they're very big. They do ratings. And he said, we spoke before the election, and he goes, look, we have a feeling that Labour's going to win. He goes, we've been advising them lots. He goes, and let's wait for the election. Then let's wait for them. If they win, then let's wait for the budget, and then we'll do the podcast. Because I definitely think we'll be unpacking a whole new business rate. He goes, that's what we've been advising them. We've been telling them that it's not sustainable for 2/3 of businesses to not pay business rates because the other third is picking up, all of the tab. And honestly, like a week, not even a week later, we sit down to unpack the budget. Well, just rates pretty much. And you could see he was so despondent. He goes, they've got the majority. If you change business rates, you do it now because then you've got 2 years to 1 year to get it in, 2 years to test it, and then 1 year to make an adjustment. And he just said, I'm really annoyed. He goes, because they're never going to do it, which means that this whole term is done. And a lot of people give the likes of Weatherspoons and nightclubs a lot of stick, but they actually pay the rates,
They do. I mean, the reality is it's inordinate, the situation that goes on. And it is a postcode lottery. There's no two ways about it with a lot of these things. But, some of the rateable values for these and the way that, even the reliefs are set up, the rateable value. I mean, we've just seen it in Scotland. What we will do is we will give you 40% off your rates if you have under £51,000 per pound rateable value, which is about 10 businesses. So and that's an exaggeration.
Yeah, I know.
But it's I think the reality is they've been talking about this long-term reform. We've been going through the process of being involved in the long-term sort of reform, but they are so driven to get these things in, from Martin's Law to talking about agent of change, planning, licensing review, business rates. There is so much, but the issue that they have at the moment, which is very clear, is, I mean, on the 1st of February, we see the duty go up. We've already seen the likes of Heineken put a shed load of money on on their rates. We're going to see more of them come forward with that. But come April, we are going to see an absolutely catastrophic drop in businesses because people are now, I mean, most people have made a decision on what they're doing. We didn't make the money in terms of building up the cash reserve coming out to the golden quarter, which we needed. Everyone was projecting their financial position and then taking April onwards, as well as the duty position, and trying to surmise where they would be. And most people are going, listen, this industry is not something we can sustainably be part of anymore. Yeah. unless you own your property or you are doing something which gives you a financial. But I think the other thing that's interesting, and this is a completely different ilk, is what we are finding now is the cash fluidity in corporates is now picking up very cheaply good businesses that are independent, that were operating prior in profit and utilizing their position in terms of procurement, etc., to bring down the cost and try and drive a profitable position and waiting out the position. Now, the worry that we have is that cannibalization of the industry is a concern.
Yeah.
70% of the industry is independent. We saw a 13% contraction over the course of the last few years, only 3% in terms of corporate. And the worry that we have is we're going to lose that entrepreneurial spirit, that creative edge, that culturally important significance that worldwide we're known for, although it's eroding somewhat, is going to start being lost.
See, this is what I don't get though. Like, and it must be by. I do wonder. Like, I do think. Is it by design, or is it a bit like Yes Minister? Like, because, like, I can't get my head around it. Are they truly malevolent and they doing it on purpose, or is it pure incompetence? Or is it somewhere in the middle, probably? But like, you know, what you just said makes a lot of sense to me, because if I'm an independent and I want to open a nightclub or a bar, the barrier to entry now must be ridiculously high, and not from probably equipment. Maybe sound systems would be very expensive. My friend's got I used to go to school with a lad, and they've been in the sound system business for years, and the stuff they sell is very expensive. They're based here in Nuneaton, but you know, for the regulation would probably bury you, because if you're just an independent person that's never done it before, but you've got this great vision, where do you start? Like, you're probably just, you know, completely inundated.
First and foremost, you have to have the financial nous, and you need to really have a good 6 to 9 months ahead of yourself planned out, and you need to have those finances to get yourself going. I think and just going back to a really important point, and the cynic in me draws me back to the late 80s, when a Conservative Party government decided to curtail the opening hours of nightclub back to 2 and 1 o'clock, as we knew in Bournemouth and different places like that. But it's hard to ignore the fact that the drawback on late night economy, the lack of transport infrastructure, the safety rhetoric, the over-regulatory control of late night economy, and the economic impact and lack of proportionate support during the pandemic, and similarly out the back of the pandemic, has without a doubt had a crushing blow to the nighttime economy in terms of its late night contingent. That also aligns with the fact that there was always this feeling that late night economy was always the dark space, as it were. That counterculture element that was out of control. They couldn't police, they couldn't manage. And it draws us back, but it almost feels like it's been marginalized and culled by design. And, we did something a while back called, the government is closing, shutting down dance floors. And the reality is that's the way it feels. And I mean, if you think about the 2003 Licensing Act and the fact that pubs were allowed to open later, those pubs really sort of put the end to that flow, didn't they? So you used to go out until 11:30, then you rushed to the club and you had your club experience. That's all gone. That flow of an evening has gone. And the reality is now what's happening is they're doing something called light clubbing. So people are now got their head round into clubs are now opening from 7 through till midnight, and they're entering into the space where pubs would go. But what they're doing is midweek, they're allowing people to be able to get home post midnight in line with the transport. And that to me just is going to have a concertina effect on the market. It potentially is going to put pressure on pubs as well. The dispersal strategy for getting people away and safety and all those sort of things then comes into question. It's like having a curfew, isn't it? If the market dictates that curfew position, like the 10 o'clock curfew, we were always taught to, pubs close at 11:30, nightclubs close at this, hybrid close. And what it does is it allows slow release of audiences so that we can manage not only antisocial behaviour, but people getting home and drunkenness and all that. They literally counterproductively did exactly what they've always promoted for us to do in licensing as a policy from government. So I think there are some.
But the idea there is that they make it your fault, isn't it? So if you reduce funding for the cleaners, if you reduce funding for the police and ambulance, or you move them elsewhere, and and then there's no buses because they're finished. There's no trams, trains because they're finished, and then someone's got to get an Uber, but it costs 3 times more. Or a taxi because supply and demand. Yeah, they're the only ones available at that time of night. Then they decide to switch off the lights early because, why not? And then, someone gets hurt, and what do you expect? The nightclubs are open, And
the interesting part about it is when you think, and just to take London as an example, midweek Thursdays become the new Friday.
Okay,
and the reason for it is because people are working in the office 3 days a week. Anyone in their right mind would take Friday off to extend their weekend. So you're not going to be in town.
Thursday's the last day.
So Thursday's the last day. Now, the other thing with it is midweek, what's happened is, and we see this, people like Kevin Peterson and others have gone out and gone, I'm out at 11 o'clock in London, there's nowhere to go. So what's actually happened is things like the culmination of the strike action on public transport, which has left people with uncertainty, has led to people's lack of confidence. So what happens, they go out for a drink, and come 11 o'clock, it's almost like a dash for transport. And where the market isn't there to support the businesses, what they've done is contracted their hours over the course of a period of time. So that contraction in market goes with the contraction of the businesses. And then people realise that come 11 o'clock, there's nowhere to go because the market, the industry, the transport, the local authorities, the policing are not working together to keep that position in terms of market accessibility open. And it's what some Londoners suffered with and many other places have suffered with, which is that contraction of resource and infrastructure to allow businesses to really sort of push the boundaries of those opening hours. That's why we'll never be a 24-hour economy, is because we've got the licensing to do it, but none of the infrastructure and support around safety, policing, transport to make sure that people can get about and we can be that 24-hour.
There's really no reason for the likes of London, who have underground and buses, and there's no reason for like Manchester to have trams. Newcastle has a tram now. Nottingham has a tram. So there's really no reason for those cities to be closing down those transportation systems early, is there really? I'm saying they could limit them, don't get me wrong, cut half the routes down so it takes a little longer to get home. You could argue that makes sense. But it almost like, you're right, they've contracted it so much that it's spilled over into so many other problems.
Well, the arguments are always commercial and safety management. So drivers being safe on way, home, conductors being safe on way home, all that sort of. I mean, I said, I think I had a meeting with Network Rail a while back, and they said, we really want to talk to you, and how can we remedy this issue about people using the trains? And I said, why don't you put on a early hours of the morning rave train? And they went to me, well, what do you mean? I said, well, you can have quiet carriages and then have a couple of carriages with DJs in it. They're people. That's the way, and that's their lift home. At least they can carry on the party all the way along the train, and off you go. They're doing it in Berlin, they're doing it in places like that, and this is where the sort of international influence comes in. But it encourages people to keep their journey moving all the way home, and you don't lose sight of it. But it's an interesting one, and I know places like Manchester and others who are really trying to work hard to expand that late night transport service, and London similarly is trying to expand that late night service, but it is very consciously driven around the commercial aspect of the market use. And if the market doesn't move to use, then we can't expand, or there isn't the ability to expand. No one's going to put a load of money out there with no return, given the sort of economic constraints that we see within the transport sector as it sits. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but it has to be with all the stakeholders aligned and supporting each other. There's no point in the transport system going, right, we're going to put a load of these on. It'd be really good if the market could use it. The industry has then got to back the transport infrastructure. Yeah. And then the policing have got to be there to safeguard them. And we need everyone consistently to work and proactively deal with all of their key points so that we can then start pushing the boundaries and growing back those operating hours that we lost.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It just makes complete sense. But it's who's willing to start the process of rewinding, because especially if we look at London, to me as an outsider, I'm not from London, I'm from near Birmingham, but I almost see it as they're entrenched in their views, and all of these things cost money, and they don't want to spend more money on things. They want to spend less money on things. So, I don't know how, but and it's a bit of a chicken and egg, because if the nightclubs are making money, they pay more tax. And I know we talk about nightclubs specifically, but nightclubs, pubs, bars, you name it, all these nighttime economies, if they're making more money, they pay more into the coffers, which then gives them that money. So I don't know. I don't know. Yeah.
You've got lots of other things. I mean, you've got things like ULEZ and CAS, these sort of things, which will also present barriers. And it's interesting that Andy Burnham has come out this week and he's won this case where he is now, instead of putting a ULEZ scheme in or its counterpart, what he's doing is investing in sustainable buses, which is expanding the infrastructure. And, we've been very clear in going out saying, look, that's a better way of doing it. You're not impacting growth. Businesses can still do what they need to do. The customers aren't constrained or worried about, fines or having to pay to come into the city. And, we get a better, more sustainable transport structure. Yeah. So I think there are lots of things that can be done. You're right. I mean, I think, we've gone out today and just said, look, I think you all need to just swallow your pride a little bit, stand up, recognise this isn't the way forward and think of a different route. Because at the moment, given the constraints economically, given some of the transport infrastructure issues, safety and everything else, there is no growth strategy in that.
Yeah.
Which is what we're trying to, promote. It's not a growth strategy. It's an ever-decreasing circle, sadly. And if we keep going this way and the spring budget doesn't come through for us, then I think April is going to be catastrophic.
Did you see the news that, I know it's not nighttime, it's more daytime, but did you see the news that Sainsbury's are closing 61 cafes and 3,000 employees are probably going to lose their job? I know they say, they're going to find new work elsewhere, but they're probably not going to. And I'm not saying that with glee, it's awful. I think this is the beginning. I think this is the first story of this type that we've seen, or the first major story that we've seen. But I think local businesses have shat themselves when the budget happened. Local small businesses all shat themselves because the fear of it, and I know it's only anecdotal, but I heard of quite a few from friends of small businesses that traded over Christmas and then just didn't reopen in January. Just thought, we're handing back the keys to the landlord, and we're not going to reopen. And I think now we're going to see big businesses do very similar. And maybe not hand back the keys, but just trim the fat wherever it exists. Yeah,
of course they will. But I mean, we've been trimming the fat for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely, we have.
You've got to recognise this. Sainsbury's, Tesco's, they've been open all the way through.
Yeah,
they if anything. And alcohol sales, off sales, have gone through the roof for those supermarkets.
They have, yeah.
So the reality is for them to be sat there going, right, we can't sustain this, we've got to trim the fat, right? Imagine what the clubs, bars, pubs, and restaurants are doing then. I mean, they're the versatility, the ability to pivot, the entrepreneurial spirit that's actually keeping those running. And I think the sad bit about it with a lot of those independents is they're operating their businesses with their heart, not their head. Which is the worry.
How much debt do you think someone like that's accumulating? Are you talking to people and they're like, I'm struggling, I'm using this credit card, or I've got a loan for this, or I've got a loan.
It's very hand to mouth. I mean, you're talking £250,000 upwards just for some of these debt, almost a mortgage, and then they've got credit cards on top. I mean, you've got to remember that there was a disproportionate support during the pandemic alone. To give you an example, Deltic Group, which had about 56 nightclubs, were burning cash at £1.6 million per month, £1 million in rent and 600 grand in central office or head office operating costs. They were getting 156 grand from the government in support, and they collapsed.
Yeah.
If you scale that up and down, it's the same story. The support that was given to nightclubs is hugely disproportionate. What the government did is they covered the basis in terms of the pubs, which was very, very slight. I mean, 6 grand, I think, was the amount of money that they gave out to pubs, but they also gave that to clubs.
The
So,
thing is with pubs as well, they relaxed the laws so they could do food. If they didn't do food, they could do food, or they could do takeaway. I know many pubs that rented car park space to like street food vendors and stuff like that. Whereas, what could nightclubs do? None of those things.
well, it's an interest. I mean, I had quite a strong argument with Michael Gove on a CEO call during the day, and I said to him, you've got this so wrong. I said, if you think about it, if you're 1,000 capacity Wetherspoons and you're 1,000 capacity nightclub, right? You open the doors at midday, so you're at capacity from 6 o'clock in the evening through till 12:1. That is quite a substantial period of time in terms of exposure and proximity for 1,000 people. All right, and that's consistently 1,000 people, one in, one out on a busy environment. If you go to a nightclub, you're only at capacity for a maximum of about an hour and a half, 2 hours. So that exposure and proximity is very, very limited. And the air conditioning in there is no different than a Wetherspoons or whatever. So they get it so wrong. It's unbelievable.
I also think that the target age group that goes to a nightclub was probably the most least affected by COVID. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. So, and let's say if they really wanted to be hard on them, they could have said, "Look, you're allowed to go to nightclubs, but the nightclub owner has to have half the capacity." For argument's sake, I'm just saying it would have been better than saying you've got to close. Like,
yeah, I mean, they were talking about because the music's loud, you're going to have to shout. And
so what's wrong with that?
Background music in Scotland because people were shouting, and it was we spent a lot of time proving that was not right. They only put COVID passports into nightclubs and not in pubs and bars. It was just surreal, some of the things that happened there. And without harboring on it, I mean, still to this day, it affects people because, we've got a bigger issue with access to finance at the moment. A lot of people are refinancing and they can't find finance to deal with the debt that they were managing. Yeah. So that's a big issue. So for us, I mean, we're in a very precarious situation. Even if you've got AAA credit, you can't find finance. That's how difficult it is for the sector as a whole because the risk base is so high. In fact, we're probably a better bet than retail. And I'll give you this as an example. I had one of my operators phone up about energy prices, and he turned around and he said, right, I'm going to phone up an energy company. He phoned him up and he said, right, I've got a pub. And he said, it's going to cost you £1.52 per unit and something as a standing cost. I can't remember. He phoned back 10 minutes later and said he was a retail store and he took 50p off each one. Same space, same address.
Wow.
And you got to look back and you go, these energy companies, these insurance companies, all of these people at the time that they were needed absolutely bottomed out of the market and they just protected their interests.
Yeah. So. I think one of the emerging patterns that I've seen is that, so I think people were sick of the last government for whatever reason. I'd like to touch on Rishi Sunak for a moment before I go on, because I've got friends that absolutely dislike the guy. Politics, especially now as a commentator, it's so vitriolic. We know it is. But I remember him very much saying throughout the whole thing of COVID, this isn't government money. This is taxpayers' money. We are going to need to get this back later on. He was a chancellor at the time. And I remember during the last election as well, when he mentioned COVID and everyone booed him. And I just thought, you know what? And it doesn't matter which way you voted for. But I remember at the time over COVID, Labour was saying it wasn't enough. What Conservatives did, or that government did, let's say, wasn't enough. And I think to myself, right, maybe it wasn't targeted the way it should be, and lots of money initially got thrown about because that's what happens when you're rushing. But I don't, for my business, I think felt pretty protected. I know yours didn't. The people you represent didn't, and I know that is, that is a shame. So maybe, in hindsight, people that had businesses like mine or like takeaways that got on their feet pretty fast, they could have said, right, you've had help now. You stop there. We're going to redistribute the money elsewhere. But in terms of Rishi, I think that he really did try, and everybody just mocked him, like, especially during the election. The minute he said the word COVID, they were jeering at him. And it was almost like, you know what, it's become toxic to say, well, we spent shitloads of money on COVID. Like, And I think now this is why the economy we haven't grown for a long time, but I think this is why the economy is in such a daft place, such a crap place. And nobody wants to look back at COVID and say, well, we did give all this money away to keep the economy going, and that didn't help either. So, yeah, I just wanted to touch on that about Rishi, because I quite liked him from where I was as a person. I mean, and the way he spoke and the way I always found him quite...
I think it's an interesting one, and I've got a varied opinion. It always makes me laugh because I sort of sit back and I think about all the politicians I've spoken to, from Gove, the health secretary, from Boris to Rishi, and it's only when you're in a room with them that you can actually start to really gauge them personally. Everything else is a facade, and Boris was Boris. I mean, he was a bit of a bumbling fool, but he was a likable, bubbling fool at times. Although the confidence in what he was going to do for the country was definitely bottomed out. I honestly didn't feel that I had an affinity with Rishi until I met him, and I spent a bit of time with him. We orchestrated a couple of days before the election a hospitality roundtable, which we hosted with Rishi Sunak when he was the Prime Minister. And I actually spent some quality time with him, just talking and just sensibly going, what do you think? And sensibly in front of me, he just said, we know what's going on. We know what our position is. But our biggest concern is to have such a majority that it's going to cause
It's quite honest, isn't it, really, when you think, yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, in that moment, my opinion changed of him. And it was, and I think he was received on that day very well. He did listen. He did, and I had about 5-10 minutes with him where I was just, talking away about general things, but just asking him questions about how he thinks it's going and etc. But he was very...
He could have fed your bullshit, couldn't he? If you're like, he could have said, "Oh, we're listening to you, and we're going to do everything you want." A bit Borisy, but actually, in actual fact, his biggest problem, and he was right, was having a majority if they even won.
Exactly, and that's what he said to me. He said, "Listen, it's not about whether we get in. It's about the majority that's presented with Labour because of the challenges that we've faced over the period that we've been in office." And he said some things I've inherited, other things have been subject to me moving forward and people having this inherent distrust of where they are. So it was an interesting one, and I must have. But out of all the people that Matt Hancock was quite a challenge for me. But the one that surprised me more was Michael Gove. If I'm going to be completely honest, Michael Gove to me seemed very smart, very aloof. He listened. He was happy to have a constructive conversation. He was more than happy to be challenged. And I kind of liked that about him. Although when you see him and the persona that he represents in the press and the way the media, it's very easy to get carried away with a very different position. So I think for me, out of the two, that was a pivotal moment for Rishi. Although, without a doubt, I think they'd come to the end of their tenure. Yeah. I think Michael Gove was the other one that, outside of everything, when I met him, that tenure, that feeling that I got from him was that he genuinely was listening. Yeah. But there were a lot around that cabinet that I sat there and I thought, no, I mean, Matt Hancock was just definitely not one that I had any just feeling towards. I just felt that he was out of control.
Well, it was, wasn't he? Well, it was, wasn't he? Yeah. So you're quite. I take it you must be. I'm just guessing, but I'm assuming. Shall I say you must be quite friendly with someone like Sacha Lord, I guess.
Sacha Lord,
and but I don't know him. And you know what I'm going to say because I told you last time. But obviously on Twitter, well, a lot of people. He's not alone in this, by the way. Like a lot of people are so sick of the last government that they openly endorsed Labour, and that's probably because they do actually like Labour anyway. I think he seems to me that he likes Labour, and that's fine. He's entitled to that, of course. Do you think people like him are a bit disappointed now? Like that the party they wanted are in, and now they've
I mean, look, we all look. Sometimes we always ask this question: it's better the devil you know than the devil you don't. And, if Conservatives would have stayed in, would we have been happy? Probably not. Labour's come in. Have they done a good job? Absolutely not. Are people disappointed that sort of hung their hat on them? Absolutely. There is a lot of disgruntled people out there that felt that Labour would have done a better job, and all the signs and the manifesto pledges and everything else suggested that we were going in the right direction. There would be consideration, definitely from meetings that we had. So the reality of where we are now compared to the promises are very, very different.
So do you think, again, like John Webber, using him as an example, and many others, like when you were going to these shadow meetings before, it was all shadow councillors, and and I know our federation president, he went to a few as well, fish and chips with National Federation of Fish Fryers, and like he's saying, oh, they're listening, they're telling us that they were important, that they're listening, and was it just to get votes? You think? Because
I think the one thing that I would say to you is they were. I think, being quite frank, the Conservatives did a lot of the work for them.
Yeah.
I think the tenure that they had, Liz Truss, the changes in PM, all those sort of things, absolutely crucified the Conservative Party.
Well, I think Boris, then Liz, then yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think the reality is and this is how I see that the journey was. The Conservatives did a lot of work to allow Labour to regain a stronger constituent position. Labour's vision was is hold tight, excuse the pain, but don't fuck up. That was a very clear narrative, and a lot of it was keep consistent, keep the manifesto front and centre, don't deviate, don't get drawn into controversy.
It's weird. I read those manifestos like obsessively because we were writing about it at the time. But the Labour manifesto didn't actually solidly say a lot. Aside from the one that impressed me the most, oddly, was I did think reading the Conservative one that it was fiscally prudent. Like, and I expected that off Rishi, to be honest. I read the ones before, not as much, but the Labour one didn't really have any meat on the bones. It was more of a guide, and it was a bit of wait till we're in sort of thing. And
I think it was let's not put anything out controversial that's going to draw on from the polls.
I was listening to a podcast recently. It was with Dominic Cummings, and I know everyone probably hates him now anyway. But it was interesting because he was saying Boris had so many great ideas when he got in, and then he said he saw who his opposition was, and then thought, hey, he's crap. So I don't need to work so hard no more. And it was just the way he was talking was quite casual. Like, and he said like he dismissed his opposition, which is a mistake you should never make. And and then obviously then there was COVID, and there was loads of whatever happened. And we know what happened. But I just think that it's a shame that like one overarching question I have sometimes when I see people on Twitter. So if I see people that comment to Kate Nichols at UK Hospitality, it's very much like, come on, Kate, like tell them hospitality is important. And I'm like, if that message gets through, that's great, because hospitality is quite social. You're drinking, you're eating. It's a bit of a mix of everything. But then when I see like yourselves, or I see Sasha Lord, or I see someone from like a pub association, I can't remember what it's called, but then it's like, oh, tell them that pubs are important, tell them that nightclubs are important. And at that point, I'm a bit like, right, I thought those other guys were a bit crazy because, I don't think government's listening to that either. But I think they're listening even less the minute you mention the word alcohol. I think that these government, the one that's in power now, the one before, and probably from Tony Blair's time, they have literally sneered at alcohol. And yet it's probably one of the most highly taxed things. You're about to touch on it earlier, and I think I interrupted. It's taxed at 3 stages: production, sale. What's the other bit? I forgot. I've written it down somewhere. Where is it? I'll figure it out in a minute. And you think it's so highly taxed, and yet we're trying to obviously change people's views. So how does the government, when they're using all the excuse that the NHS is on its arse, how can we then say, oh, we're allowing clubs and bars and such and such to do these things and flourish?
Well, it's interesting you talk about alcohol, but we spoke about smoking a while back, and there was a load of things, and they came out and said, look, cost the NHS something like I can't remember what it was billions of pounds anyway. Now, smoking is inherently something which is diminishing. So people are walking away from smoking. They're not smoking while they're vaping, and there's, smoking in terms of the proportion of the market is going down, it's declining. And that has an impact on the NHS. Alcohol has a massive impact on the NHS, but it also has a massive impact on the taxation to UK PLC.
Yeah.
So the reality is it's interesting that didn't come into the domain or the conversation. We've seen recently Santander talking about dry January and getting absolutely lambasted for putting an ad out telling everyone not to drink in January, and being a bank, which is surreal.
I'm sick to the death of virtue signalers. Like, they're a bank that probably hold money for terrorists, yeah. And they're telling you not to drink in January. And I probably sound like a conspiracy theorist saying that, but they would have money from unsavory people, maybe not as high as a terrorist, yeah, but very unsavory people. Yeah, they're not debanked, yet they're telling somebody don't drink in January. Why? I just find it incredible.
We've had some interesting ones. I mean, look, the reality is we do a lot to promote and tell people about the risks of alcohol, right? It's the same as not having gambling on the agenda, isn't it? Because of the harms that we talk about. But the reality is there's a balance. And, if we do it, I think the question you have with all of this is, we talk about drugs, we talk about alcohol, we talk about gambling, all as addictive sort of proposition. If you ban it and zero tolerance it will go underground and it's unprotected and people can't manage those spaces,
Yeah.
So there has to be a balance. And then there is also the taxation element. There is a huge amount of money that comes from the alcohol industry as a whole to UK PLC. And, there are protections where, there's been conversations around having health as a fifth licensing objective. We know in Scotland there is a real big movement of anti-alcohol. And the government are very, very sort of driven towards controlling the alcohol sort of purchases, etc. So without a doubt, it's on the agenda, but I don't think they're ever going to escape that they won't be able to remove it because of the taxation that they receive from it.
Absolutely, but they don't want to be seen to encourage it.
No, and they can't be seen. I mean, it's like us here. I mean, we have an argument. It's like, why don't you do a VAT cut? And the first thing they say, well, it can't be alcohol. You can't cut VAT on alcohol. And then when you talk about it, you talk about production, wholesale, and
production, distribution, and sale. Yeah.
Yeah. When you talk about all of those different areas and the taxation, actually taking the VAT off the top would make a big difference to the industry.
Yeah.
Make a big difference to what we're doing, and they're still getting a shed load of money from it. But the reality is from a positioning perspective, it won't be deemed to be. That's why the white paper on gambling hasn't been something that's been pushed by government, because they don't want to be dealing with the narrative around proactively expanding the gambling industry in the UK. Same way they don't want to be, we put a lot of pressure on in terms of smoking, but smoking was something which was a dwindling sort of habit for people. So, alcohol is a whole different thing. And then we get into the nanny state element.
You see, that was my question. After talking to you briefly last week, I just had this nagging, those two words in my head, nanny state. And I like to think to myself as someone that just wants to let the markets do what they do. Especially as I've got a bit older, I think, this year especially, I've sucked myself into economics and just letting the free market do its thing. But I just feel like this constant fiddling and adjustment from government, all of them. I'm not blaming one. I mean, all of them. I just feel like I'm just not too happy with it. And on the flip side, I think to myself, well, I could go to the supermarket and buy a case of beers for next to nothing compared to what clubs, bars, pubs, and everyone else sell it for. I could absolutely stay at home and be a lonely twat and get absolutely plastered. And that's not good for anybody either, is it? So a part of me does think, why don't they tax that more? Because obviously supermarkets don't make huge margins on it and subsidise where you're at.
Well, it's one of the big plights that we always chase after. I mean, the fact of the matter is the industry at the moment, or particularly the market, is because of the economic climate, what they're doing is they're going and doing what students used to do in isolation, which is preloading. They'll go out, they'll get a case of beer, go home, drink it till 11, 12, go out for 2 hours,
Have one maybe, yeah.
have one between three of them, and then they'll come home and continue the house party. So the reality is whether we talk about the pandemic and people going out and buying alcohol, or whether we talk about the cost of living crisis and people cost conscious buying things from supermarkets and utilizing them and not going out, now the frequency of visit, dwell time and spend being impacted by all of those, there's a culmination, but supermarkets haven't lost out. That's where the interesting part is. So for me, when you talk about Sainsbury's, you've got to question the fact is that a driver from a board that wants the profit and has seen the profit go up during the pandemic? And
well,
and maybe they're going,
one of the things with Sainsbury's that people haven't picked up on is actually the cafes that are being closed. And actually, they're probably the least efficient part of their business, because they probably need, if you've got, what is it they say, like how many hours work one person can do, like manpower per job, that's probably the most least efficient part of their business. Yeah, like they could probably get one member of staff doing an aisle, stacking it, getting it ready, and then jump on the tills. Like if you've ever been to an Aldi supermarket, you'll see how efficient a person can be, because they literally work so hard in an Aldi supermarket because they do everything. But I'd imagine they've just got rid of the liability. Now's a good time to get rid of the liability, get rid of 3,000 employees, promise you won't put them elsewhere, but you will. Yeah. And they probably struggle to find good employees anyway. So it just means that they can shuffle all this around, make it look like now while there's a bit of noise. But I actually think we are going to see more of that.
Oh, without a doubt. It's already, listen, one of the challenges our sector has is there is an inordinate amount of people who are losing jobs.
Yeah.
Or, but it's, I think the issue that we have is we don't collectively talk from one place.
Yeah.
We talk about our individual silos. Kate will talk about hospitality. I'll talk about nighttime economy. Emma McClarkin will talk about pubs. BII will talk about pubs and independent sort of space. MVT will talk about grassroots music venues. The one thing that we lack is that continuity purpose together. And a lot of it is about proprietary nature. Everyone wants to protect their own interests, their own members, and we get that. But at some point, we've got to actually think past that and think of an industry that needs everyone to stand together.
I do think that, like, again, following Sasha on Twitter or X, it always sounds like eggs when I say X, so I like to say Twitter first. But and he's not alone in this. A lot of UK hospitality, I think I've seen on NTIA Twitter. Everyone's asking for a hospitality tourism, let's say nighttime minister. I don't know if that's 3 different ones or one. I don't know. No. A, is that someone else we can blame? 2, is that somebody else that taxpayer pays for and gets nothing from? And then 3, like, what makes us think they're going to listen? Like, because they don't understand. Like, I've been in front of MPs talking about VAT on behalf of the fish and chip industry. And, like, I remember one saying to me, I was at Park Plaza, Westminster, and the MPs used to stay there, where they did under the last government. And I remember seeing my local one, I was chatting to him, and even he was a bit like, oh, is there VAT on hot food?
And part of the issue, listen, I had a special advisor say to me, I wish MPs recognise that nightclubs are not like Saturday Night Fever anymore. So there is a reality to that. A culture minister turned around to me and said, I don't know what the value of electronic music is. So, there are shortcomings all over the shop, without a doubt. I think the one thing I would say to you, and when we talk about this, there is actually a hospitality minister.
Okay.
Already in situ, a guy called Gareth Thomas. Gareth runs an office that looks at small, medium enterprise businesses, and within that encompass state is hospitality. And he is known to us and others as the hospitality minister in DBT.
But he's the business minister as well, isn't he? Yeah,
he's part of the Department of Business.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. But he's never run a business before, has he?
I don't know his background.
I'm not sure that means everything either.
Listen, there's got to be a balance between the two. The reason we talk, and I had a long. Sasha's a chair of our board, so I speak to Sasha every other day, and it's his birthday on Sunday, I think. So
happy birthday to him.
Yeah, and we had a long debate about this. It's not a hospitality minister we need; it's a nighttime economy minister.
Yeah.
That's what we need. We need hospitality has a minister it's very business driven. It's hotels, pubs, bars, restaurants, right? That's hospitality in its predominance. Tourism is already encompassed within portfolios within ministerial positioning. The bit that we're missing is nighttime. Nighttime economy sits across several of the ministerial portfolios, not only with DBT, but also with DCMS. So electronic music clubs and carpet clubs, as we know them, which are those commercial venues you go out to meet, boy meets girl, boy meets boy, girl meets girl, etc., is something that falls within both sides. But nighttime economy is a very nuanced, very unique environment, which is ecosystem based, and it's something that's being adopted across the world. We've now seen Australia have a nighttime economy minister with a portfolio purely around nighttime economy. We have been talking about, and I think this is interesting, we talk about night czars, nightmares. There's 110 nighttime economy advisors across the world now. Every state in the US has got one, and for us, we've got two. We've lost London's night czar for good or bad. We lost the one in, the one in Birmingham. I don't know what's happened with them, and the West Midlands, also a challenge. So, for us, I mean, we're falling behind actually having good people advocating for our industry.
Again, do you think it's a snobbery thing? The British just want to hide this, the nighttime economy. They don't want to talk about it.
I think we're seen as a burdensome industry. I think that when you talk about local authorities, they see it as a resource drain. They see it as burdensome in terms of antisocial behaviour, drugs, alcohol, safety, all of these sort of things. So they don't see it like Berlin would see it or Tokyo would see nighttime economy. They don't see it as an economic and cultural driver. They see it as a pain in the backside. And that's where it becomes marginalised. That's where policing becomes very fraught or onerous. So I think, our approach and the value perception of nighttime economy is pretty bad, to be honest. But I don't think it deserves it. I think we put hospitality into a position where it's a value, it's a tourism mechanism, etc. Nighttime economy, which also crosses over, which, if you think about it, electronic music in the UK is probably one of the biggest exports that comes from nighttime economy. I've been to Tokyo, US. Everyone talks about London and Manchester and the amazing electronic music culture and club culture and live music culture that we represent. And the only ones who don't recognise its value is in the UK.
It's weird, isn't it?
It's surreal.
Yeah.
And there is no pride in who we are and what we do. This is another example that's quite interesting. If you go on Visit Britain and you take the top 20 cities, visit Sunderland, visit Newcastle, you can't find anything about nightlife. You can't find anything about the clubs. You can find castles. You can find everything else. You can't find any.
I genuinely think they want to brush it under the carpet. They're embarrassed of it.
Oh, without a doubt. But we're worth 300 million nightlife tourists per year. You can't brush that under the carpet. Imagine if they put a bit of time behind it, grew it, and made it something that it should be. Imagine if they turned around and cleared the slate and went, right, we understand what it is economically and culturally. Let's get behind it. Let's get Visit Britain to promote it. Let's imagine 300 million people without it while you brush it under the carpet. It's surreal.
And for me, like we discussed it at the beginning, it's this active stripping away all those protections, making people feel unsafe. They think they don't do that, but they do. It's clear by their actions. But they've obviously done that. And yet, if they did the opposite, starting in London or all these big cities like Manchester, Birmingham, and said, you know what, this area here, we're going to keep the lights on for longer. We're going to have a couple of buses running at this time of night. We'll have a cut-off, but we'll have a couple of buses and there's not double-decker, it's just single-decker, whatever. Like, make people feel safe. And instead, the reason why crime happens at that time of night is because those criminals have figured out it's the good time to do it because no one is around. And so,
and that's exactly, we talk about things like 24-hour hubs, right? You can't make London a 24-hour city by just going, London is a 24-hour
leaving
city.
The lights on for 24 hours. Yeah.
So what you do is you take areas like Westminster, particularly things like Leicester Square, You create the mechanisms for transport and getting home. You present all those routes to be able to get out. You put policing in, and you create a 24-hour hub where those businesses can expand, and then you grow it. That's the way to adopt and get to a better place for this. But,
And
it's going to take some expertise from the industry to really break down some barriers with people like the mayor and local authorities. And I think that's going to happen. I think London, there are opportunities ahead.
And I know we're talking about like big cities, but I feel like nightclubs in smaller towns are like non-existent now. They're not like they used to be. Like every local town had 2 or 3, maybe one big one, and then some smaller ones, and then you filtered down into bars and pubs. Whereas now, like that just doesn't exist like it used to. Like our local nightclub in the town I used to live in, Nuneaton, is now a gym. Where I live now, actually, that's the same thing again. Actually, I don't frequent any of those gyms, by the way, as you can tell. But like, I'm probably more likely to go to the nightclub at 40 years old than a gym. But like it just shows that everyone seems to be happy for it to be gone, though. No one ever says, "Oh, I miss that." Like, "Oh, I wonder if the kids miss it." When I say kids, I'm just saying if you're older, someone in their 20s would be classed as a kid.
Oh, without doubt. I mean, I think the problem we have, we did a big campaign recently, the Last Night Out campaign, all right? And what we did is everyone was talking about, 72 festivals lost this year, 8 nightclubs a week, 3 nightclubs a week, 8 pubs, 2 live music venues, and we just turned around and went, right, okay, what is going to be a stark message that's going to turn people's heads? And we worked out with the decline when there would be no more nightclubs in the UK.
I was going to ask you this. I'm glad you're mentioning it. Go on.
So we turned around and we worked with McCann Agency, who were fantastic. And they turned around and went, we're just going to do this Last Night Out campaign. And we're going to go out there and tell people that on the 31st of the 12th, 2029, given the decline rate that we're seeing nightclubs go lost, there will be no more nightclubs. It was probably the most impactful message that we've had out there. We had Jaguar doing podcasts about it. We had Annie Mac talking about it. We had so many people picking it up and just going, this can't happen. I built my career around it. And what we've seen since, and interesting enough, and I'll not put it down to that campaign for me, but the focus around nightclubs and the predetermination of the fragility of the sector actually made people go out. And during the golden quarter, we saw, without a doubt, an uplift. And we've now seen a bit of a corner being turned. So we are now seeing nightclubs turning around. So where we were seeing a continual loss, we're now seeing in the last sort of couple of months a slight shift where things are starting to, I wouldn't say return, because we've lost 37% of nightclubs. But what we are seeing now is more nightclubs opening than closing, which is a positive sign given the current environment.
It's interesting because I think another thing that's probably under thought is that the younger generation have changed massively. I remember when I was, let's say 19, my parents hated the fact that we went out. Talking to parents nowadays, they can't wait to get their kids out. They're saying, go out, go have a good time. Like, no, I'm going to stay in and play games all night. I'm going to stay in and watch Netflix all night. And I think it's understood how these digital platforms really have zapped people in, pulled them in,
Listen, we spent the best part of 3 years during the pandemic, trying to do everything from it's called couch culture. We set up communication platforms, which exacerbated the position. You could speak to your nan. Your nan wouldn't even know how to use those things up until this sort of came about. You could get food, you could get drink, you could entertain yourself, you could speak to your friends, you could pretty much do everything without leaving your house. We then had to go back and reverse that. And one of the challenges the offshoot is social anxiety. We saw within US big issues. We saw 850,000 new 18-year-olds come of age. They didn't know how to go out, how to interact. They didn't know their limitations. Crime was up, antisocial behavior was up, drunkenness was up, drug taking was a real issue. So we then got to a space where when we opened, it was a frenzy of going out. 6 months later, we then walked into the Ukraine war. So the reality is we've had a very sort of difficult period where it's almost, I always look at it like this. We talk about talent pipeline gap, but we've almost had a consumer pipeline gap, if that makes sense. Because what we've had is youngsters coming through that would normally come to fruition in these years now be settled with actually having home life environments where they can do everything from home. So, going out isn't as much of a driver. But the other thing that I think is really important to understand, and this is the one thing that I get frustrated with, is this misconception. People do want to go out. People do want to socialize and enjoy culture. No, and the one thing that the media get wrong is they always say, well, there's no alcohol. People aren't drinking alcohol. Just because they don't drink alcohol doesn't mean that they don't come out.
Yeah.
What we are seeing is people are coming out and they are supporting. But the challenge that we have with all of this is we're having to adapt to a new normal. The no and low alcohol ideas, the things like competitive socializing, the quiet areas within venues. We've just seen Amber in Manchester ban phones on the dance floor, because they want people to immerse themselves within those environments. So there are lots of digital sort of clashes as such, where new and old school sort of club environments are converging. And just to be clear, 18 to 30-year-olds are very tech savvy. They want tech way through. Whereas my age is like, I want to be immersed, I want to listen to the music.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how we've had the likes of Clockwork Orange, which has hashed itself and come into this massive sort of movement with Andy and Danny. And then we've also got the youngsters that are still after their electronic music, their culture, but they're not going out and drinking alcohol with it. What they're doing is they're very health conscious and savvy. They just want to go out and socialize and engage. And that then has knock-on effects financially or commercially for businesses.
I do think we're probably in some ways, maybe with what feels like a recession, companies are telling their staff to get back to work. Yeah, not just work from home. He's gone from 2 days at work to now 3 days at work to 4 days at work. Soon it'll probably be 5 days at work.
Yeah.
And if that happens, does the old ways start to creep back in? Like the old systems, like, oh, let's go out tonight. It's a Friday. Let's go out as a team, or let's go out with mates, or let's go to the pub and let's go to a bar. And is that what's needed? Because at the moment, there's still a lot of gaps in society where,
I mean, look, I always look at it like this. We always talk, we have had to adapt. We've had to look at budgetary shifts. The model to operate a pub, a bar, a restaurant, a club has changed massively with the cost increases, with everything that we're doing. The one thing that we don't understand is what in terms of the market is the new normal. And we're a way off it. Economically, we're way out. How people are managing themselves, some of the challenges. I mean, we know that Sundays up until May, we've got huge amounts of strikes going on, so transport won't work. Over those bank holidays where we earn an inordinate amount of cash, people can't travel. Saturday night, early hours of the morning will be affected, and Sunday day will be affected. And, that's going to cost hundreds of millions of pounds in terms of revenue. So we've got so many countering sort of moving parts, from safety, lack of policing, transport infrastructure, economic pressures, licensing and regulatory controls, which are onerous, from noise from communities to, overspill, antisocial behaviour, drug issues. All of these things have had an inordinate effect on our sector as a whole. Yeah. So we have to understand that the new normal is not there.
Yeah.
And I think I think it was Watts, who is the CEO for Brewdog, or ex-CEO for Brewdog. He said, we've got, another 3 years of this till we start to get an understanding of what it looks like settling.
No, absolutely.
And energy. I mean, Ofgem turn around to you and they say, I've had meetings with them, and they've turned around and they've gone, this is the new normal in terms of prices for energy. And when you hear that, that's hugely worrying.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just feel like, when you talk about the likes of social anxiety, like a friend of mine, he had a real tough time. It was before COVID actually, and he got immersed into the screen, and he didn't realise straight away, but he got really sort of mentally sick, and he was in a real bad place. And someone, I think it was like a doctor, told him, look, you need to start going out again. You need to push yourself. You've got friends. meet them once a week at the pub. Next thing you know, he goes again, and then he goes again, and then he goes out to a nightclub, and then he goes out bike riding again, and then he's made a few more friends because they had friends, and I think, and on top of that, anyone listening to this that's probably our age, I guess, like you're a bit older than me, but we're all in the same bracket. I think when we look for insurance, you probably would have met your girlfriend or boyfriend in a nightclub or a bar, and they need anybody listening to this that's probably young needs to stop swiping and just go out and have a good time and meet somebody and have a good good night out and I think that's probably why people are so tense these days because they haven't let their hair down. Like,
well, the interesting part, I mean, it always makes me laugh. We do this conference, and someone said to me, he goes, "Oh, why don't you stream it?" And I said, "Well, why don't you just come?"
Yeah. No.
And they go to me, well, yeah, I know, but I might not be able to make it. I said, "Well, come next year then."
Yeah.
And they're like, "Right, yeah, but it'd be really good if you could stream it." I said, "But you need to come and interact with people."
Absolutely. No, we hosted a media training event for some of our clients and people that we know, and someone that wanted to come says, "Why don't you stream it?" And I said, "We've just been locked up for 2 years, pretty much, like give or take, like on and off." And I said, "Why would you just come out and meet people?" Like, and I think for me, I think events need to almost stop doing this dual thing. If you want to record it for later and put it on YouTube later, that's fine. Yeah, but I think if you say to people, and the problem is as well with streaming as well, as I said to this person, the problem is you'll have all the intentions of logging on. Yeah. And then life happens. The postman knocks on the door. You 1 minute you're listening to Sacha Lord do a speech, and the postman knocked on the door. So you go open the door. You come back. Now you're talking. You miss what he said, and then you think, well, come on. Like for me, I just don't think you're either completely immersed in that industry's event or you're not. You can't be half and half.
Oh, without a doubt, and that's why we do it. I mean, we have certain arguments with people. Oh, I think it's silly you don't stream, and I said, well, listen. In an environment where we're people orientated, I think people need to come up and see people.
Yeah,
and it also drives up people going, well, I was there. Did you see that? And did you see? Oh, right, okay, I'll definitely come next year. That's the way.
That person probably won't. Like, because if they've got it in them, they probably won't. Interesting thought on pubs. Like, I don't know, you don't strictly look after pubs. I know you might look after a few, but I just want your thought process, what you hear at when you're out and about. I know for a few years, well, probably a long time, but there's been a lot of noise the last few years that pubs are closing down at an existential rate.
Yeah.
And then I was chatting to somebody in the pub industry, and he said, well, actually, they are, but we're also opening lots of new pubs in new areas too. And I think that never breaks through that message that actually, and also the definition of a pub has changed somewhat. Like, for example, someone told me once that loungers group treat themselves like a pub because they're all day dining and you can have drink. And has the definition of a pub shifted where years ago, for the most part, it was a working man's thing? They'd go for a pint after working all day. And now it's like, well, actually, I'm going to go to a different style of pub where they do food and so on, with a bit more food-led or mixed, wet and food. And then they are opening in different areas, so more near shopping centres because that's where people tend to be. And then my last thought process really about pubs is, have coffee shops chipped into them a little bit as well? Because
I mean, look, I think the challenge that we've got is there are a lot of blurred lines.
Yes.
Hybrid spaces are the new kitsch phrase. And even nightclubs are not what they used to be. Many of them recognise that they need to be multifaceted. Many of them recognise that they can't just use a nightclub can't just be used on a Friday and Saturday night. It's got to be able to be used in different facets, and that's really important. And pubs are no different. The challenge you've got is, whether you're a pub, bar, restaurant, whatever you are, whatever makeup you have, whatever activity that you represent, pubs are suffering without a doubt. But there are certain types of pubs that are probably suffering more than others, is the way I'd present it. Clubs as well, in a similar fashion. The more town and old sort of smaller cities and have been impacted heavily because of the amount of pubs and bar networks and hybrid spaces. And when I say hybrid spaces, restaurant to to pub, to bar, to sort of late night experience or late night bar experience is the way that things have been able to be moulded. And that comes off the Licensing Act changing in 2003 is really the culmination of it. So, but also you're seeing things like, the academy groups, that do club show, do live events and then do club shows afterwards, and they're pretty multi-use private function. But then you've got things like E1 studio spaces that can do bar mitzvahs in the day for photo shoots, and then they can have, be one of the leading sort of electronic music venues. So I think there are lots of different environments. The key to it is people recognise that they have to be multifaceted. Yeah. They cannot just be one thing to one thing. They've got to be a multitude of different sort of outputs.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's the one thing that's sort of challenged, and that also has geographical influence depending on what the need or requirement is within Hull or within Portsmouth or wherever you are.
Whereabouts are you based yourself?
Sevenoaks in Kent.
Oh, okay. So I don't know if you have one near, but do you have any Roxy ballrooms near you?
No, but I know of them.
Yeah, and I must admit, like, we've been to a couple now. We go to the one in Bristol. We take the kids in the day, but then when you sort of get to a certain time, like let's say 4 or 5 o'clock, the ambience shifts. So it's already quite dark and gamey in there anyway because it's got bowling and all that sort of stuff. But I quite like taking my kids there, like, because actually I think it sort of gets them used to being around older people, if that makes sense. Like, and my 10-year-old is obsessed with football, so he'll watch football, we'll play bowling, have something to eat, watch football. And then when we leave about 4 or 5 o'clock, they're starting to get really busy. You can feel like, you know what? After 7, 8 o'clock, that's going to be buzzing in there, and all the way till night time, I imagine. They stay up quite late. And I do wonder, you mentioned it earlier, like, what did you call it? It was enforced fun or something. I can't remember what you called it, but
sorry.
Like enforced fun almost, like a place where you go and you all have fun. But I think you called it a specific thing, but I can't remember now.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's my fault. I lost track of that. But it feels like that's another mixed venue that seems to be doing quite well at the moment. And are we going to see more of those where they start off early and you'll just keep staying till night time?
I think it's really dependent on market.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about competitive socialising.
That's what you said. That's what you said. Competitive socialising. Yeah.
Yeah. Ping pong, darts, all these sort of things, And I think the other thing is it aligns with some of the economic pressures, because if you can go in and buy a square deal, which gets you your drinks, your food and your activity, you know what you're spending. I think there are hundreds out there that will go out with a credit card for a drink with their friends. They have a few. They go out, according to Mickey Flanagan and what he says. And the next thing you know, you're £200 in the bin and you wonder where your credit card was being used and what's happened. So it's and how many people you brought drinks for. So the reality is there is some economic control within it. And it's interesting how those sort of things work. But they work. And, it could be part of a model moving forward. We've seen lots of different models, two-way streaming to, all sorts, VR sort of environments to a multitude of those things which are sort of becoming monetized. So it's an interesting one, definitely. I don't think we've seen the end of it all.
No, I think you're right. One thing I'd like to finish on, because why not? Just keep it fresh in people's minds. If you could click your fingers today and make the government listen, what is it you want?
I think the key, there's two things that I would want. One is them to recognise the value of nighttime economy and see it as an economic and cultural driver. And then the other thing is I would want to have a industry person as a nighttime economy advisor or minister within government. Those two things would identifiably change the precept and direction of the way that we're managed nationally, because then we would have strategic and policy drivers, and we'd have someone within government who would be able to advise on direction and travel. At the moment, I think the challenge that we have with government is they don't know what to do with it. And we've spent the last 5 or 6 years educating government on the categorizations within our business and how it works and what we look like. But I think without having someone in there that absolutely knows, it makes it very, very difficult to convey it. Unless you come and work behind the bar, set up a festival or run a nightclub, as a career, it's very hard to convey the challenges that you face and what you need to see from a government.
Yeah, no, I think that's bang on. And you're not asking for a lot. Like, you're not asking for a lot at all, to be fair. It's pretty simple.
It is pretty simple,
Yeah.
but all that will predetermine and take things in a different direction.
Yeah.
I mean, we can sit here and ask for VAT, we can sit and ask for all of those things, but the reality is having someone in there that has a direct influence will be the difference.
I made a really bad joke on a podcast here that I make bad jokes all the time, so that don't, that's a very obvious statement. But I said as a joke that I almost see that VAT is going one way and it's probably going up. And as I said it, I laughed and I thought, oh, actually, maybe that could be true because they've reneged on a lot of things. And that budget, when they said this is a one-off budget, now we're already seeing stories saying, well, actually, it might not be a one-off budget. And so I don't know. I hope VAT don't go up. But I do think that the focus on VAT from all the industries, like, because our industry has been screaming for it for years. Hospitality obviously has, tourism has, you guys have to some degree. Everyone's screaming for it, but I wonder if sometimes it takes the real focus of the real issues as well. But obviously, it would be a great lifeline, but at the same time, it doesn't take the pressure off all the other things we've just discussed.
No, it doesn't. But I mean, I'll finish with this, and this is the bit that I always remember with the devolved white paper going in, that local is going to become the new national. So the focus should be on local government, not national government. National government will set policy, local government will change direction and start to build a better local dynamic. And that's the difference. That's where we've got to focus. So over the next year, the likes of Andy Burnham and others, Steve Rotherham, and some of these metro mayors are going to have greater influence on the direction of travel in the regions that they represent. And that's where we're going to have the greatest influence because they're real people.
So you're hoping to filter from the local level up to their national level?
Yeah. So, I mean, look, we always concentrate on lobbying central government, and central government are disengaged from some of these areas. So we would be better to still lobby central government, but adjust some of that focus into the metro mayor regions and those people that on a local base have a stronger influence on some of the infrastructure, safety mechanisms that we really need, because not everything sits at the foot of central government. And if you think about it policy-wise, what can they really do about policing and safety and infrastructure?
Yeah.
Not a lot. What they can do is they can talk about it and they can put it on the agenda. But the reality is what we need to do is move to more a transactional position.
Yeah.
And
if you use the same resources on Andy Burnham than you would the Treasury, I think you could probably have better results. Because, like you said, he can actually action something. Yeah. And exactly. He'd want to show, look how successful it's been.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as soon as you start getting into the competitive nature of metro mayors, you open up a new can.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, on that note, Michael, thank you for your time. It's been amazing. I've really enjoyed it. And I hope your event is an absolute hit. I hope everyone loves it over those few days. And if there's ever anything new, send it over to us. We'd love to promote anything we can for you. I know it's not your target audience, but I think it's good for our audience to understand what other sectors are going through, because we're all in it together. So like you said earlier, there does need to be a bit more cohesion between the industries.
Without a doubt. And listen, thank you for inviting me on. Sorry about last week.
That's all right.
Jim, but I think it's been a great podcast. Thank you for having me, and let's keep in touch.
Definitely. You too, mate. Have a good one.
And you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Ceres podcast. It was an absolute pleasure to chat with Michael and learn more about the incredible work he's doing at NTIA. I genuinely think it's really important for us to be talking to industry body leaders from similar fields so that we can learn about their unique struggles and challenges, but also to hear how they overcome them. If you want to learn more about the NTIA, visit www.ntia.co.uk. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode, so join the conversation in our Ceres podcast discussion group on Facebook. And don't forget to follow us on social media for updates on episodes and industry news. And remember, join our WhatsApp announcement group. The link will be in the show notes. At Ceres, we're here to help your business thrive with innovative products and valuable insights. So do drop us a message at any time, because we'd love to hear what you're working on. Until next time, thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.